So good evening, everybody, and welcome to Arborist Question Time. I'm John Parker, Technical Director at the Arboriculture Association here in Stonehouse in the UK. Before we get started, I should note that the chat function is currently open, hooray, and will stay open until the questions begin. It's always great to see where in the world people are watching from, and I know there's a big international audience tonight, so please feel free to say hello on there and give us a shout out. Once the questions start, chat will be switched off because you've got to be paying attention, and I'd request that you only submit your questions through the Q&A button. In just a few minutes, I'll be asking our expert panel to introduce themselves and tell you their headline answer to today's question. You'll then be invited to participate in a poll, which I'll explain in more detail in just a moment because it's slightly different today. Each panelist will then have 5 minutes to give you a presentation about their chosen topic, and then we'll make a start on the questions that hopefully lots of you will be submitting through the Q&A button. The shorter and more concise the question, the better. You know who you are. After an hour or so of questions, I'll ask the panelists to wrap up their position with a 1-minute summary, and then we'll reopen the poll for you to vote. I'd also like to tell you quickly about our next live webinar, which will be held at 6 p.m. on Wednesday, June the 24th. Amelia Williams will be talking about bonsai and the lessons which arborists can learn from that particular art form. And Rob Northrop will be giving a presentation about taking an ecological approach to urban forestry. This one's going to be called Small Trees and Big Ideas, and you can register now. But this evening is all about international arboriculture. I've been really lucky over the last few years to be able to travel to attend different conferences and meetings in other countries and to get to know many international colleagues working in arboriculture and urban forestry. And wherever I go, I discover that regardless of what country they work in, the tree community around the world faces very similar problems and challenges to a greater or lesser extent. What seems to differ is the way in which they address those problems and meet those challenges. And this is where I think we all have so much to learn from each other in sharing knowledge, ideas, and experiences. Our panelists might come from very different parts of the world, but I suspect that wherever you're based, you'll find a lot of what they say very familiar indeed. So I'm very excited to introduce you now to a panel of international experts based in Brazil, South Africa, and India. Tonight, we're asking the question, what do you think is the most important issue in arboriculture in your country today? Now, because it's difficult to compare issues between countries, in the poll, we'll be asking you to vote on what you think is the most important issue globally, rather than with reference to any specific country. Hopefully, all of that makes sense. So, let's meet our panel.
My name is Luiz Pedreira. I'm an urban forester at the city of Rio de Janeiro, environmental office here in Brazil. And I think the most important issue in arboriculture in my country is the absence of formal education in arboriculture or in urban forestry as a result of Brazil not recognizing the arborists as a career or profession. That's it. So.
Thank you. Nanamhla.
Hello, everyone. My name is Nanamhla Gwedla, and I am a PhD candidate in the Department of Environmental Science at Rhodes University in Makanda, South Africa. And from a researcher's point of view, I believe that the most important issue in arboriculture in South Africa today is the general lack of trees in the old townships and the newly developed low-cost housing areas, as compared to the more affluent areas and the more affluent urban areas in the country. And now I'm going to pin my entire presentation around this, as well as on the role of agency and the participation of communities in trying to change the status quo. Thank you. Thank you.
Vaibhav.
Hi all, my name is Vaibhav Raje. I'm from Mumbai. And I'm a certified arborist, ISO certified arborist and director at Tricotech Mumbai. And the most important issue for arboriculture in my country today is, I feel, is the lack of awareness and the lack of knowledge in the arboriculture sector. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you very much. So if we could open the poll now, and like I say, remember that we're not trying to compare issues across countries. Try and think of this in general terms, sort of across the world, I guess. What do you think is the most important issue in arboriculture in the world today? A lack of recognition of arboriculture as a profession, the difference in urban forest investment between wealthy and deprived areas, or a lack of knowledge and awareness of arboriculture? People slow to decide today. It's not a competition though, nobody panic. We're all winners, especially the person who gets the most votes. Okay, so I reckon that if no one hasn't voted by now, then they don't know which they're going to decide. So let's stop it there. Let me write it down because sometimes we lose it. It has been known. So 55% out in front, a lack of knowledge and awareness of arboriculture. I think that's all three of these issues are certainly things that I think we're probably all familiar with across the world. So if we can get rid of the poll, I always struggle with that bit. There we go. And we'll hand over to our first presentation from Luiz.
Yep. Well, let me show you the urban forests of the city of Rio de Janeiro. Some of its most interesting aspects, its evolution, the creation of the novel ecosystems, the new anthropized ecosystems that characterize it today, the landscaping and environmental projects that the city have developed with the times, some with community participation and involvement, the heritage of landscaping projects from the colonial era, and the Brazilian landscaping of the 20th century. Here, this is Tijuca National Park. This is what I call this novel system. It's a restored area. A great part of this forest were coffee plantations in the 19th century. It was restored, and now it's looks like a natural forest with some exotic species. And these are this is a state park. Most of this area is reforested yet. And here is Copacabana Beach, famous. And these mountains are a natural municipal park. Also restored, forests were restored. This is the Pão de Açúcar Natural Monument, also with forests restored in it. Protected area, another protected area, like this, another one. And this is a restoration project in Brazil, in the city. It began in 1987, 33 years now. It works with popular engagement. The slides are, the upper slides were before, in the beginning, and the lower as it is now. I will show some examples like this, and also in mangrove areas, and the guys from the community that work. And then other pictures. This area is more than 20 years being worked, and it still got to work. It's difficult, not easy. This is the first area, and this is almost of this area was replanted. Well, now I'll show you some urban parks in Rio de Janeiro. Some of them were the work of landscapers of the 19th century. This is Rio de Janeiro Botanical Garden. These are urban parks inside the city from the same age, the 19th. Sorry, the 18th. These are urban parks inside the city. These are a result of landscapers of the 20th century. This is from Bolemax, a famous one. Other landscaping. This is the most recent Madureira Park. And now I will show you some good and bad examples of forestry trees. Their current situation, and some of the things that I can say are the result of the inexistence of the specific training in arboriculture and urban forests, associated with the ignorance about the science and even of the terms arboriculture and urban forest here in Brazil. We don't use them until the last decades of the last century. Led to the lack of recognition of the arborist or the arborist's role, career, and profession impacting our urban forests. These are protected trees in the city, the big ones, all be declared by law as a protected trees. And like this one. And these are some examples of the good urban forests planted in streets we have in Brazil, in Rio de Janeiro. This is a neighborhood that was planted. It's urban trees. These are other examples along the city. Some with almost 100 years, maybe, like this. And I think there are, this one is a nice one. You like this, John? Beautiful. These are good examples. Like this. And even that. And indeed, there are a lot of wires, but let's go. And these are the bad things that happen with our trees today. The hurtings, the vandalism, and the bad pruning, the bad use of space for roots and the tree. Like this. I can't breathe. We can say, I can't breathe, the tree says. And the pruning because of the electric wires, like this. And this, the tree on my right, I suppose you see, is part of, seems like risky. It's part of a group of 7 trees. There are the biggest we have in Rio de Janeiro, like this, almost 40 meters, let's say 120 feet, right. And this also, some things in Rio de Janeiro, and things like this. I think we miss an arborist here. And these are from other cities in Brazil, just to show that the same problem happens in other parts in Brazil, like this. Southern Brazil. And this, just to show the last one, this area is supposed to be a motor racing circuit. It's the last forest in all this neighborhood that you can see, but it has a few trees in all this neighborhood, very dense, and the only forest they have, they want to do a motor racing circuit. That's very bad. All right, that was my presentation. John, I spent my 5 minutes. That's it.
You spent your 5 minutes.
Thank you.
Almost perfect. Right, let's nip over to India. This is the wonders of technology. That's not a problem at all. As long as we're not going to take Vaibhav horribly by surprise. There he is. Okay, no problem. So, are you all right to share your screen and we'll move on to Vaibhav's presentation instead?
All right, great. So thank you, John, for being an amazing host for this evening. And thank you, Arbor Association, for having me here to speak on the topics or the issues for arboriculture in India. So I'm really glad to be here. And thank you to all the participants, especially from India. It's quite late here. And thank you for staying up and waiting to hear what we have to say today. So thank you to each one of you for being here tonight. I'm going to talk about the issues that we have in India at the moment in terms of arboriculture. Broadly, the 2 aspects, how I look at it, is the lack of awareness and the lack of knowledge in arboriculture. So to solve any problem, so I like to put out a question out to all of you, and you can just think on your own and see what answers you get for yourself. So what do you think is the first and the most important aspect towards solving any problem? Any problem, doesn't have to be arboriculture, anything, but to solve any problem. Well, I feel the first and the most important thing is to be aware of the problem, that having awareness of the problem in the first place. Once you have the awareness, it gives you more clarity about that problem. Clarity, you get a proper plan, and that plan helps you take right actions. You take actionable steps towards that problem. And if you take the right actionable steps, you get success towards your problem and you're able to solve that problem. Well, in India, in terms of arboriculture industry, we are somewhere juggling between these two phases at the moment. That's awareness and clarity. So a lot of people are aware, but there's no clarity. People want to do something in arboriculture, but there is no awareness on how they can do it. So there's a lot of mix and match happening at the moment. And it's really, really tricky to go on to the next 2 or 3 steps, that is action or clarity, because there is a lack of right knowledge at the moment. And if there's not right knowledge available, then your results are not going to be as up to the mark as you expect. To add to this further complexity, people who are aware about the problem, but sometimes due to the situation, they tend to become negligent towards their trees or towards managing their trees. And it's solely sometimes because of the circumstances they are in. For example, it could be a budget limitation, it could be a time limitation, it could be lack of expertise that are available or lack of right equipment that is available for you to do the job at the moment. And arboriculture is not even an industry at the moment here in India, and it is very, very unorganized. We are a handful of arborists working in India at the moment. And compared to the other sectors like landscaping and horticulture, which are fairly organized and have their own associations and they run their associations really well, arboriculture is yet to see daylight in that aspect. And the other complexity that we have is a lot of anecdotal knowledge which gets passed around by untrained people or people who do not have complete knowledge about arboriculture or about managing urban trees. And that knowledge gets picked up really quickly on the ground and gets passed around. And the trees get managed every year back and forth using the same principles or same knowledge, which causes more harm than good for the future. So since I'm from Mumbai, I'm going to be talking from Mumbai's perspective, but I speak for the whole of India because I'm sure all the other issues that Mumbai has would be there in the other cities of India as well. So Mumbai is a pretty big, populous, sprawling city of more than 20-25 million people. And we have about 3 million trees in the city. Obviously, the civic requirements, the civic priorities for this city is going to be completely different. Trees do not come on the top of the list, as you see in your country as well. Trees are not always on the top of the list. And that's why creating awareness about arboriculture and the right tree management is a big challenge. And why I feel is a big challenge at the moment is, people don't look at it as a problem at the moment. If there is a wrong practice going on, that is how it has been going on for so many years. And since people don't look at it as a problem, there is no need to change. And hence people don't think of being aware of the problem. And hence people don't look at the solution to change it. And hence the business as usual scenario continues. And people don't really think about it on what needs to be done to change it, which further aggravates the problem. So after probably 3 or 5 years down the line, if you have to go and work on certain trees, there would have been a lot of mistreatments done to that tree in the past 20-30 years, which would be very difficult to undo. So that is what I mean by it's going to further aggravate the problem. So to give you an example here, you can see there is a person almost 10 meters high up on the ground. He's not there by his choice, but because of the circumstances, everyone wants to feed their family, feed their own stomach. But at the same time, there could have been some very, very good standards in place, especially for safety. But the circumstances don't dictate that. And some people have to choose bravery over safety. And it's a very sorry situation in India at the moment, specifically in Mumbai. Every year, there's a huge tree pruning regime that goes on. And lots of trees are pruned, and sometimes not in a very standard manner, and also in a very unsafe manner. And this is the cause of concern. That's what I mean by lack of awareness and lack of knowledge. And all the trees in India, specifically in state of Maharashtra in Mumbai, is governed by an overarching document called as the Maharashtra Urban Tree Preservation and Protection Act. It's an overarching document. It's a general document. It has got all the broad aspects for tree management. So it tells you in how many years you have to do the tree survey, what is the procedure you need to do, you need to follow to get a tree removal application processed, and so on and so forth. So for me, I look at it as more like an administrative document rather than a technical document, because if I have to protect a tree, if there's a tree protection order for a particular tree, that this tree needs to be protected as per this act, there is no guideline on how you can do that. So there is a huge gap between the policies and what's happening on the ground. And that is what we need to work on. So we need the technical guidelines. So you can think of yourself, especially in the UK, about 30 or 40 years ago. Probably you were in the same situation. You were just working on getting your standards in place, getting the technology upgradation, getting the education for arboriculture in place. So we are just in the same position, what you were about 30, 40 years ago. And also to add to it, there is no mention of arboriculture, not just in this document, but any of the projects that come across, infrastructure projects, the tender documents, there is hardly any mention of tree management, arboriculture in there, which leaves a very open-ended scenario for people to work with trees. So this is a photo of Cassia fistula tree. This is flowers of Cassia fistula, Indian laburnum, if you must have come across any point of the day. It blooms really beautifully in India in summers, and it just gives me hope every summer that, you know, even after the harshest season or even the worst season, you get bloom, you know. So this gives me a lot of positivity when I work. And I use this tree as an example to keep myself going. And I would just like to close with some positive remarks saying that, you know, at the moment, there's a lot of interest towards arboriculture. And people are really looking up to move to arboriculture as an alternative career or take it up as a career in the near future. A lot of students are very keen on getting their certifications or degrees in arboriculture, but unfortunately, we don't have an institute which serves that at the moment, but hopefully soon we'll be having that. And last year, we also did an international conference on arboriculture, the first international conference, and we got a lot of positive remarks on that and a lot of positive feedback. And that set things in motion, and we started getting some really good opportunities to work with some big clients. And we were able to demonstrate, we are able to lead by example by showing how the right work, how trees need to be managed properly, right from tree risk assessments to impact assessments of trees in urban areas. And we could do it with the help of international collaboration that we have at the moment, and all the knowledge that we have and all the support that we get from the Arboriculture Association, the ISA, and also some private companies in and around the world as well. And we are in the final phase of setting up our own Indian Arboriculture Association. It's just because of the lockdown, things have gotten a bit postponed, but we are almost through with the documentation process and everything. And once we have that in place, we hope and we believe that the right knowledge will start coming out using these 3 steps, the last 3 points. We hope not just the awareness, we're taking care of the awareness by doing a lot of marketing, talking to people, doing webinars, conferences, events, but the right knowledge needs to come from the right source. And these are the 3 points where we feel the right knowledge will come out for the arboriculture in India, and hopefully to have better days for arboriculture in India as well. So that's all from me, and thank you so much. Over to you, John.
Thank you very much, Vaibhav. That was great. Very interesting stuff. There's lots of questions coming in. There we go. So, Nanamhla, how are we looking?
Good evening, everyone, once again. Today I'm going to be talking to you about urban forestry and arboriculture in South Africa from a researcher's perspective. And throughout this presentation, I'm going to be using the terms urban forestry and arboriculture sort of like interchangeably. So I don't want people to get sort of confused as to, okay, she's talking about arboriculture now and then urban forestry. I'm using the term arboriculture and urban forestry interchangeably. Now, getting into the gist of my context, we may all be aware that urban tree cover is quite an important environmental amenity. Unfortunately, it is often spatially heterogeneous in terms of its distribution, both between and within towns, and this is both at the neighborhood and at the household scales. Now, this is because urban forests are located in highly altered as well as complex ecosystems where human beings are the main drivers of both their locations, their types, and sometimes their amounts, as well as their general distribution. Now, at the city scales, when we talk about the distribution of trees at the city scale, we look at this heterogeneity from a point of there are other people
who are responsible or who make the decisions regarding where the trees are placed and whatnot. So these we may attribute to urban forest governance personnel who are in most cases and across many countries in the world are situated in municipalities or government offices that work directly with municipalities. And then when we zoom in to the household scales, we talk about individual households as they are the ones that make decisions as to whether to plant trees or not. And some of the decisions that they make are largely influenced by their knowledge, their interest, as well as the resources they have at their disposal, where they are able to make decisions about whether to buy trees or not to buy trees, what types of trees, or the kind of vegetation that they want in their yards. So, and in many cases, when we speak of the municipal officials or the urban forest governance personnel, we also talk about the skills that these people have in order to make decisions about what type of trees to make or how to even situate those trees. Now, as I've said that we all are aware of these differences in the distribution. These patterns of distribution, unfortunately, they almost always favor certain socio-demographic groups over others. And here we talk about a situation that raises environmental equity concerns, where people in some areas are able to benefit from the ecosystem services that are provided by trees over other people in other areas. Unfortunately then, low income as well as the typically high density urban areas are sometimes the ones that are susceptible to this uneven distribution of urban vegetation and urban trees and generally urban green spaces, which means that they are not able to access these benefits. And this is largely attributed by the general, it is largely evidenced by the general lack of trees that we sometimes see in these areas. Now, these points that I've spoken about are largely and greatly mirrored in South Africa. Some of you may have read in the literature or in popular articles that we've got different kinds of residential areas in South Africa. And unfortunately, some of those residential areas or those suburb types do not have trees as much as others. They do not have parks as much as others, or generally open and green spaces, whereas others enjoy leafy suburbs, leafy streets, and more than one park in a single suburb, for example. And this is not just an issue for South Africa. It is unfortunately common throughout the developing world. Now, when we come back to the issue of the question that we're talking about today, where we're talking about the problems or what we think are the issues in arboriculture in our individual countries, I want to take you to a little background about South Africa. That South Africa has a complex history of occupation and development, right? Where we've got areas that were formerly known for white people, where white people used to live, and these were predominantly affluent areas. And then we had the black occupied townships. That's what we term them locally, townships. And these were relatively poor. They were characterized by systemic underdevelopment with respect to things like housing, things like electricity, sanitation, social services, as well as economic activities, just to name a few. And this was before 1994. And post 1994, when the new government came in their quest to try and address these disparities, as well as in response to now meeting the demands of rural-urban migration as more people were now moving to urban areas, was the introduction of low-cost housing areas under the Reconstruction and Development Program, which was a program by the post-apartheid government. And this saw millions of housing units that were built, as I said, to meet the demands of the high rate of rural-urban migration. And to this day, even the current pattern of development in these areas, they are all characterized by rows upon rows of small houses that have an identical design. And the priority of these areas is for the indigent. So most of in fact, all of them are set aside for poor people who unfortunately cannot afford housing. Now, one may think that, okay, new housing developments are being rolled in. So which means, and just as a side note, we don't call them townships anymore in terms of the formal description of these areas, but they are described, or the government describes them, or would like them to be seen as sustainable human settlements. Now, sustainability can speak to a lot of things, but from within the context of my research, I look into sustainable human settlements as ones that would ideally have some kind of a green space here and there. Now, looking at our question, that is where the gist of the issue is, where I'm saying currently, today, in South Africa, despite the new plans the government is rolling out, despite the new development being termed or being described as sustainable human settlements, there is still a large disparity in the presence of green spaces, in the presence of urban trees in these low-cost housing areas, as well as the poorer townships compared to the more affluent areas. Now, if we look at the quotation from, one of the quotations from the Habitat Agenda, goals and principles, as well as commitments and the global plan of action that South Africa is a signatory to, which was developed in 1996, it clearly states that the countries should commit to promoting optimal use of productive land in urban and rural areas. I'm not going to read the whole quote, but towards the end, it speaks of the support in the implementation of improved land management practices that deal comprehensively with potentially competing land requirements for agriculture, industry, transport, underdevelopment, as well as my interest, the green spaces, as well as protected areas and other vital needs. Now, recently, the former minister in the then Department of Human Settlements also said, in alluding or agreeing with that agenda that South Africa is signatory to, that any new agenda must build upon the Habitat Agenda of 1996. And what was agreed to in 1996, it still it remains valid. And we should continue to achieve those important principles even as we move forward to address new challenges. And even now, I'm not going to read the whole quote, but I'm sure a lot of you can see on the screen. But what we can pick up from both, from specifically from that the initial quote from 1996, is that urban green spaces are very much an important issue that needs to be incorporated in the development of human settlements. Unfortunately, we are not seeing that in South Africa at the moment. There are many reasons why we can say this is not happening. Maybe resources are not being directed to departments that deal with urban greening or urban green space maintenance and development, or people, there are very few people that have the skills to do that kind of work. There are many reasons, and these are not unique to South Africa. But in light of these other reasons, and within the context of knowing that these are low-cost housing areas that are set aside for poor people, I am inclined to conclude or to say that trees or vegetation, so to speak, may not necessarily be a priority to people that need to worry about where their next meal is going to come from, for example. So if you are going to come to these to people in these areas and speak about tree planting, what is in it for them? And it's not so easy to tell them that, no, you just need to plant a tree because it is important. Everybody knows that trees are important, and everybody appreciates the benefits that they can get from trees, and as well as every other uses for the trees that they have. But what is important is we need to make people understand that they can incorporate tree planting with their other activities such as urban agriculture. In that way, it will be easy to convince people that they have the agency, they can do it. If all other avenues are failing where the funds are not enough or resources are not there, they themselves can begin in their homes by making sure that each person plants a tree as part of their garden. And if they do it as a community, looking at it from a perspective of community participation, it could even be a more sustainable project where everyone is proud of something that they have all been part for. So with those words, I believe that as much as this is a problem, it is something that can be overcome. And I know that as South Africa, as communities in South Africa, we very much have the capacity to make sure that this happens. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Apologies to everybody for the technical problems there. That was blame me for that. Sorry about that. But it was worth the wait, certainly. Thank you, Nanamhla. Okay, so we've got lots of questions in. Please feel free to keep putting all of your questions in. I'm going to start off with quite a nice, with quite a nice general question, which we'll work through everybody for their opinions. Question from Jess. What's the government attitude towards arboriculture and urban forestry in your countries? What's the attitude of the government towards arboriculture? Luiz, do you want to go first? Try and keep the answers to around about a minute, but we won't be too strict, but about a minute.
Well, in their words, they are always worried about the green areas, the natural areas, but with their attitudes, it doesn't work. In my city, I can say from the perspective of my city, because it's a big country, many states, thousands of cities, but on the perspective of my city, what I saw is that we have a few practical actions, some very good, like the restoration project I presented, but mainly the distribution of areas, of green areas among the neighborhoods, and the professionalism of the care of trees in the city as a role, and the support the political politics gives to this work is very low. That's it, what I think.
Thank you. Nanamhla, what about in South Africa?
Well, in South Africa, I could say that the attitude is generally positive, but a lot of the time, the response that comes up is, yes, we might be enthusiastic about it. This is something we would like to happen, but our hands are tied most of the time because we don't have the resources to implement any of these things. But in the areas where something is definitely happening, where the resources are available for trees to be planted, we can clearly see that the government and the municipalities are doing their bit. They are planting indigenous trees, and they're trying by all means to make sure that even if the trees are not planted outside of people's yards, where the resources are available, people are given trees to plant in their yards. So generally, most people seem to be for tree planting and arboriculture, but it's all a matter of, can we do it? Is it getting the necessary support from the decision makers that are up there, those who allocate the resources?
Thank you. Vaibhav, what do you think?
Yeah, I partly agree with Nanamhla. Same in India as well. The government agencies are enthusiastic. They're quite positive. But, they always say that their hands are tied. And there's always a political side to it, which you can't deny. and you have to go with the flow, and it takes a lot of patience to deal with such situations. And it's not very always fruitful as well. Sometimes it might just end up, nothing might happen after a lot of efforts that you put in. But overall, I feel that there should be more proactiveness and more openness for new things that come into our arboriculture industry in India.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much. So it feels quite positive. That feels generally quite positive. Governments are at least saying the right thing if they're not quite doing it just yet. So we've got a few questions that I kind of want to ask, I guess, an opening question for myself, really, that hopefully will put some of the other questions into context. And it's about the management of trees in the, let's take the city in which you live and work at the moment. This is to all of you. In the UK, a lot of public trees, street trees, parks and such like, are owned by the municipality, by the city, and they're managed by the public sector, by tree officers. Who tends to manage trees in your cities? Is it a municipality with internal tree teams, or how does it work? If I could just ask you generally for the city that you're in, we'll start with Nanamhla for your city.
That is where the parks section is situated. And they are the ones that are responsible for the upkeep of trees in public spaces. So the street trees, as well as in the parks, they are the ones that are tending to those trees. And I do know that they even have an in-house nursery where they propagate all the trees that if they can't purchase anywhere else, they propagate the trees themselves in their own nursery.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. Vaibhav.
Yeah, we have in Mumbai, specifically to speak, we have, like I mentioned in my talk as well, the Urban Tree Preservation Act. That's an overarching document. And the municipal corporations of each city manage trees. So they are the owners of the trees, and they provide or they give permissions for the necessary felling or planting of trees in the city. And within Mumbai, to be more honest and specific, is that there is a tree authority. There's a committee which looks after all the processes. So that includes some technical members and some political members as well, which jointly review the proposals that come in and provide their decision on whether the tree needs to be taken out or not.
Okay, thanks. Luiz, what about Rio?
Well, in Rio de Janeiro, the management of the urban trees is that the question?
Yeah, who manages the sort of urban trees, mainly the public trees?
Yeah. The management of the public trees is divided into institutions. There's a Parks and Gardens Foundation that do the planning and the planting, and there's the company that deals with the garbage.
Like the waste disposal type company?
Waste disposal company that's owned by the city also, do the pruning and removal of trees. So one of the problems is a lapse of time between the planting and the beginning of the maintenance. And also another question, another problem is mainly the management of the grown trees, the big trees, is done mainly by reactive, not proactive, not by planning and planned maintenance, but just reacting to the public. That's a problem.
Okay, thank you. Right, that's good. I just wanted to get a bit of background context, I think, because it varies so much all over the world, and even within, of course, within countries, it can be very, very different. Okay, so I suppose following on from that, in a way, Vaibhav, this is a question. I'll start with you. Is there effective law enforcement? It's a question from Julian. Is there effective law enforcement for instances where protected trees are cut down unlawfully or without permission? I suppose, first of all, there's almost two questions there. Do you have tree protection, like we have tree protection orders here? That's the first thing. And secondly, are there punishments for those people who don't follow them? Vaibhav.
Yes. So going back to my presentation where I mentioned that there is a Urban Tree Preservation Act, there's a Tree Act, and in that Tree Act, it is clearly mentioned that, felling a tree without a proper due permissions is liable for, it's basically a non-billable crime in Mumbai to fell a tree without any permission. And obviously there's a penalty to it and probably 6 months of imprisonment. It can be extended to 1 year. And there is a process to also get the tree permissions in place. So there is, whenever there's an unlawful tree felling that happens, there is a police case is registered and the culprit is, apprehended, and probably the process of penalizing that person takes place. But before that, there's a set process in the whole routine of getting the tree protection. And there are tree protection orders similar to what you have in the UK. And the applying department, the entity who wants to apply for tree protection has to go through a series of process and regulations to get it. So I hope that answers your question. So great question there.
Yes, sorry, that was me complicating things.
John?
Luiz.
Yeah. I want to talk something about this also.
Please.
That's me. That's my time.
Of course.
Right. That's good. No, here we have a lot of ordinances also about trees, how you should plant, how you get a permit to cut all trees in any place of the city. Any tree you want to cut, you got to have a permit. But many times these don't function well. Many times we have also law enforcement systems. If you cut a tree, you can be fined. Yeah, you can. But many times it don't work because the dimensions of the city and problems, even of problems of safety.
Okay, so but there are if protected trees are cut down, then there are harsh penalties then too in Rio.
Yeah.
Nanamhla, what's your situation there?
We've got ordinances in South Africa in the form of municipal bylaws, where if you, for instance, want a certain tree to be removed, you obviously have to make an application to the relevant department in the municipality, and you need to support why, obviously, the tree needs to be removed. Also, the same principle applies if you want a tree planted maybe just outside your yard, you go through an application process. But the situation doesn't become very clear for other parts of the city because, as I mentioned earlier, the distribution of trees is not uniform throughout. So other people generally don't even have those trees for bylaws to be attached to. So most of the time, these trees are in the affluent areas and just around the CBD. And in those instances, many people don't really do much to those trees anyway. But there are laws in place to protect in event that something happens or someone damages a tree. Some people could even get a fine if they destroy a tree or do whatever, anything that is not acceptable to the trees.
Right, okay. Oh, well, that feels positive. We've all got laws in place, so yeah, this is good news. So Luiz, this one will come to you first. Again, it follows on from the public, from the idea of people damaging trees, I suppose. You showed in your presentation some vandalism as well, I saw. But if you could describe, in general, in your city or perhaps in your country, what is the public view of trees? Are the public generally favourable towards trees, do you think? Obviously, I know there's going to be huge differences in opinion, but as a general thing, what's your feelings, Luiz?
I suppose this answer will be from my city perspective, but it's in many parts of the country will be the same. People love trees. Indeed, they are far from their home. They just don't like the tree that is just in front of my window because it comes with mosquitoes, with bats, and it makes shadow for the city light. It makes it unsafe. and a lot of problems that people solve. I think that I always think this, in some cases or in many cases, this is a result of the improper planting or improper maintenance. So if you don't plant the right tree in the right place, or if you don't have the right the needed maintenance, and then the problems begin to appear. And so people has the, in general, see the trees as a bad thing. But everybody loves trees in general, but far from their own.
That will sound very familiar to a lot of my colleagues watching in the UK and probably around the world. Nanamhla, I mean, same question to you. What do the public think? But also, I'd be interested in knowing, do you think there's a difference in the perception of trees between the wealthier areas and the less wealthy areas? What do you think?
Okay, so generally, and these are things, these are things that I've come across during my research conversations that I've had with people, that whilst people may love trees in the different sectors of the town, whether in the poorer areas or in the wealthier areas, but there is a general trend of vandalism to trees, and it comes in two ways: from the people and sometimes damage by animals. So this is especially true in the smaller towns in South Africa. So while people appreciate the trees, one of their biggest issues is, if you're going to be planting trees but not consult us as the residents and tell us that trees need to be planted and these are the types of trees we're planting and this is where we're planting them, then we don't care. We shouldn't be expected to look after those trees. In fact, we might even just break them. But those are the general attitudes that people have towards trees in the case when they are not consulted. And this is mostly true in the township and the poorer areas. That is not the case, however, in the more affluent areas. And also one thing to note is that in most areas, the trees that are in the affluent areas are older. So they were planted quite a long time ago, and they cannot easily be damaged, so to speak. And in your question about whether there are differences in the attitudes between the affluent and the poorer areas, there really isn't much difference. But one thing I've picked up or I've noticed throughout my research is that the people who don't have the trees, they become overly excited about them, in the sense of, yay, you're bringing trees. That's exciting. That's nice. We want the trees. But then the people from the wealthier backgrounds or the wealthier areas, well, it's normal. We have trees. What's the big deal? As much as they are appreciative of them. So it's not to the same degree, although it's all a general appreciation.
Thank you. And Vaibhav, what do you think in India, in Mumbai?
Yeah, I think it's human nature to be connected to nature, to trees. So naturally, people in India as well love trees. They want to have trees, but like Luiz said, not in my backyard, But obviously, a lot of people are very active in keeping the government agencies on toes as well, where there's a lot of a big number of trees which are required to be felled in big projects, and which keeps not just the government agencies, but people like us, the experts from this industry, also on toes to do the right job and make sure we choose the right trees to be felled. And hence, it's really, really peculiar for government agencies to give out tree protection orders or tree felling orders after a lot of due diligence, because there's a lot of love that comes back to them after they have given that out. So there's a lot of love going on for trees as well in India.
That's good. Okay, so next question, again, sort of linked. Nanamhla, this one's coming to you first. I could talk to you all day about the sort of green inequity issues that you've worked on before. I think it's fascinating. Sometimes when people plant trees in poorer areas, it's like it's something that's being done to the people top down rather than something that people are engaged with. What sort of what sort of level of community engagement is there in the townships? I know you don't use that term now, sorry, but what level of engagement is there with the people there, or is it something that's done to them?
Honestly, and this is something I'm quite passionate about, and it has been a subject of my PhD. And in simple words, it is mostly something that is done to them. Yes, municipalities or the implementing agencies, they do mention that they engage with the communities or they consult them. But a lot of the times what I've found is that that consultation or that engagement involved that agency or that municipal department going into the community and informing the people that we are going to be planting trees. It's Arbor Day. We're going to be celebrating the beginning of Arbor Month on the 2nd of September, and we're going to be bringing trees. And that's just about it. Whether they want the trees, where they want the trees to be planted, what types of trees they want planted, it's not always discussed. And what I've seen in the areas that I've visited where tree planting has actually taken place is that most departments or municipalities tend to just distribute an indigenous tree and a fruit tree. But as for the consultation and the engagement, it's not that extensive.
Interesting. We're gonna have to have long conversations about this. That's very interesting. Vaibhav, what about in India?
It's not really a big difference, to be honest, and I completely agree with Nanamhla as well. And I really don't have much to add to it because South Africa and India, in terms of the priorities, are very much similar, and I'm sure nothing much different in Brazil as well. So I agree with Nanamhla and I second that as well.
Luiz, is there much community engagement in tree planting or in tree management?
Well, I can divide it in two parts. First, in low-income new settlements, I don't suppose they are top-down, and I could say that they are not even top-down. they are not planted at all in most cases, and even when it's planted, you don't have space. The space is used more for houses. And you won't see good examples of urban trees planted in newly developed low-income programs from the government. But in the other side, you have at society level a lot of groups, low-income, medium-income, or anyhow of groups that came many times from social media to plant trees and to care of trees. This is a movement I saw in society here in Brazil that we should enforce, work with. We that work for the government might see these things happening and work with them. John, can I just share something with you?
Sure.
You all just see. We have a program here in Brazil. It's called My House, My Life. Minha vida, minha casa. My house, no, my life, my house. And look, a quick search on the internet. Look at the images. Look, where are the trees? It's a big program. It's Brazil, all Brazil, wild. Where are the trees? I didn't plan it. I just looked quick here. You saw Nanamhla?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very similar to South Africa. That's a very familiar model, so to speak.
That's it.
So, I mean, it's disappointing. We have governments who are talking the talk, and then we have developments that look like that. And again, I think it is very similar in the UK as well. I think we all share the same problem. Okay, next question. This is a question from Paul Mandabondabo in Papua. Hello, Paul. Thank you for getting up at about 2 o'clock in the morning again to join us. Paul's asking about tree species. You're all in very different regions, but when you come to plant trees, do you concentrate on local species or exotic species? Is there a big debate between local and exotic species, or natives and non-natives, as we might say? Vaibhav, you're first on this question.
Yeah, in India, there's a lot of promotion going on for native tree species, and I believe, yeah, which is the right thing to do as well. Because the exotic species, they grow really fast. They give a greenery very instantly in a short period of time, but they don't last very long. They have a lot of defects, and they tend to fail sooner than the native trees. So now the pressure has been put, and there has been a list of native tree species officially declared by the government agencies, which they are encouraging for people to plant as well. So we are mostly 80% focused on, or more than 90% focused on planting native tree species.
Okay, thank you. Luiz, what about in Rio?
Yeah, just a minute, or I can use 10 minutes.
You can use 1 minute for this one and then another 9 minutes later.
All right. No, it's a hook question in Brazil. The mainstream thought of technicians is to plant native trees. Indeed, mainly in most of our cities, mainly the trees are exotic. And so there's a huge movement to plant native trees. But what I see, what I think is that when we talk about international experiences, people always say, plant the right tree in the right place. And what I saw also in the last years in some countries is that some countries like states, they have a lot of genetical developments to urban trees. And I think the thing is not just to plant a native tree. You got to, if you want to plant a native species, you got to work in it, test it to see that it will perform well in the city as it performed in the forest. That's it. That's my answer.
Okay, thank you. And Nanamhla?
A very big thing in South Africa currently, in the sense that municipalities that are engaged in tree planting, in new planting, are specifically focused on ensuring that only indigenous trees are planted. As a result, like I mentioned earlier, if people are being given trees, or if trees are being given out to communities, or whatever the case may be, you'll find that a household is given an indigenous tree and maybe a fruit tree. So for now, the idea is, let's not plant any alien trees. Let's focus on indigenous trees. And as much as it's moving at a much slower pace, because obviously tree planting itself is not widespread, but it is happening at that scale where tree planting is happening.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Okay. Right. There's been so many questions in from all over the world. It's quite a struggle to work through them all here, actually. I'm going to ask a question. We're going to go a bit random. A pests and disease question. And this sort of, I think, actually initially came in for Nanamhla, but I'm going to go to Luiz first because it's Luiz's turn. But the question was from Julian in South Africa, saying that shot-hole borer is killing many trees in South Africa, and of an estimated 6 million trees, we may lose up to 20% of these. And I was just wondering, really, going to Luiz first of all, are there any particular pests and diseases that you're concerned about in Brazil or in Rio at the moment?
No, 2 points I can say. First, the area of phytopathology of urban trees is we got to develop a lot, because we know few here in Brazil. We don't know. It's not a developed area. We have a lot, some plagues, some pests, but it's the area, all the science in the area is yet to be developed. I can say that some specific diseases like the dieback of the mango tree that is planted as an urban tree in many places in Brazil. Indeed, most people say it's not good, but they use it. And some diseases that attack also ficus trees. But we don't have nothing like they have in the States, like the EAB or plagues that are destroying all a genus or in the whole country. We don't have this yet.
Okay. Nanamhla, any particular issues in South Africa? Like I say, shot hole borer was mentioned, but be interested to hear your thoughts.
Yeah. It's actually the biggest one. And in the last few years, it's been a very big threat to urban trees in many cities. And I do know that some colleagues at UNISA and at the Johannesburg City Parks are actually conducting research on what can be done to try and limit the spread of the disease. But I completely agree with the comment that was posed from the attendee from Joburg. It's quite a big problem in South Africa at the moment. And as far as I'm aware, that is the biggest one that we're faced with.
Okay, thank you. And Vaibhav, what have you got in India?
Well, in Mumbai recently, we had a huge incidence of attack of mealybugs, the pest, the white sucking pests. And they wiped out more than 20-30% of rain trees that we have in the city. They were affected by that mealybugs. And there were quick interventions that were taking place, like spraying of insecticides and neem-based pesticides, and other secondary measures were also introduced to save those trees. But mostly the mealybugs attack happened because of a secondary reason. That is, the trees went into, or trees had a very decline in their health condition, and that's how the mealybugs took advantage of it, because of the stressful conditions or the compaction around the trees and so on and so forth. And that's why a lot of trees, rain trees in Mumbai, were affected by mealybugs. So that is one pest that I can think of at the moment. But usually after the monsoon, during the monsoon, we get a lot of fungal infections coming up on the trees, like the powdery mildew and stuff like that. And sometimes decay, a lot of decay starts happening in older trees as well. During the monsoon, the water starts collecting into the grooves and crevices of the tree trunks. And that leads to a lot of termite infestation. So the problems of termite attack during the summer season really peaks up. So these are the few pests that we have at the moment, which are problematic.
Thank you very much. Okay, we've only got time for a couple more questions, I think. We've been having some good discussion here, so I'm very happy. Nanamhla, there's lots of questions coming in from people who are very interested in your research, and it may be, maybe we can circulate some of your work or some of your papers after this to people who are interested. I think there's a lot of people who would like to learn more about this. And I think we've had a couple of questions, one from Sarah, one from Paul, and others. I suppose almost looking for practical answers, like how do we get trees into the poorer areas where there's no space and where they're a low priority? How do we persuade poorer people that trees are important when they may be struggling to get food or to get basic utilities? What sort of practical steps can we be taken? And I'll ask you gentlemen as well afterwards, but Nanamhla first, please.
From the interactions I've had with local communities, people from these poorer areas, I've come to the conclusion that incorporating urban greening into urban gardening and permaculture could be quite a useful strategy. And in doing that, we don't just say, here's a tree, plant in your garden, but you need to be quite specific and engage with the people as to what tree this is and what am I getting from it. And the most common perception or preference that I'm getting is that people actually want to have fruit trees. So if we can try and incorporate tree planting into food security, we would have done quite a good job in actually conscientizing people or making them more interested in going the extra mile. Because we cannot ignore the fact that people are poor and their priorities are on other things other than trees. So if that is the case, then let us try and incorporate what is the one thing that is the priority to them, and then adapt urban greening into that priority. That way, we're going to get a lot more people saying, yes, I'm in. May I please have an apple tree too? Oh, actually, my neighbor had a peach tree. May I please have one? So if we can engage in conversations like those and actually get people to do it, we will have won half the battle, if I can put it like that.
Absolutely. I think just before I go to Vaibhav, I think Rob Northrop in Florida is watching, and I think what you've just described is what Rob calls social values, and that's always stuck with me. Find out what people's values are, and then find the ways that trees can meet those needs, rather than telling people what's good for them. I hope I've quoted you right there, Rob, if you are still watching. Brilliant. Okay, thank you, Nanamhla. So Vaibhav, what do you think in answer to that?
Yeah, I think the community engagement for urban greening is a very important aspect, and planting not just avenue trees or aesthetic trees, but something that would enforce or drive people to improve their food security from it as well, which is quite important, like Nanamhla mentioned. So probably planting a lot of fruit tree species, or probably more of timber species. In rural areas in India, a lot of people depend on firewood for still, not all of the rural areas, but most of the rural areas, they still need firewood to run the gases and the cookers at their home to cook food. So probably planting trees with high timber value, or which would provide high timber or high firewood, would also engage the communities, not just in urban areas, but in rural areas as well. So that's what I feel. Hope that makes sense.
Perfect sense. Thank you. And Luiz?
Well, I agree with my colleagues that that's it. You have to have the involvement and know the people, learn from them, work with them, and also I think in low income areas, when you have few public space in sidewalks mainly, you should have a look in the perspective of green infrastructure at all. And I say, I don't know the word in English, artists, to plant food for people in small places, greenings.
Like an allotment, we might call it here.
Yep, and also work with fruit trees, and in rural areas like Raje says, with firewood. I think this is the way, is to work and know the social needs and their approach, their perspectives, and work with it, and not just to plant a yellow tree here, a blue tree there. That's it.
Okay, thank you so much. Look, I think the time has gone quicker than I thought, and I could sit here talking all night, to be honest, but I think we should probably look to draw it to a close now. And maybe if I could ask you each to give just a few thoughts, up to a minute, just maybe pulling together some of your arguments or reiterating some of your points from your original presentation. We'll go to Luiz first, if that's okay. Just like to sum up your position or your thoughts from the evening.
Well, we talked before, John, the problems that each of us pointed are well the same. I think that we have the same problems in most places, and the awareness, as Vaibhav says, is very important. We have to work more in us arborists, urban foresters, communicate with not only with the general public, but with the social medias that are so important today, and with the planners, the other professions, architects, engineers, and we have to communicate with everybody if we want them to to have a bigger awareness. And even if we want them to know the importance of the arborist role and the urban forest role in planning and managing the green infrastructure of the city, I think it's the most important. That's it.
Thank you very much. Vaibhav, some closing thoughts.
Right. So this has been a very, very informative session and a lot of new things that have come across to me as well. So I think there's not one or two things that I want to close, but so many things I want to close. We might need another hour to do it. But some of the specifics which I would like to close on is that, we need, increasing the awareness at the moment. We are trying to drive that in India at the moment for arboriculture, not just for these practical things, not just for the legal things, but also for the educational purposes as well, to trying to drive people to take up this as a career choice and improve the industry of arboriculture in India. And at the same time, we're looking at international collaborations, specifically right now, we have people from Brazil, South Africa, UK, and from all over the world talking to us now. And, we want to learn from each other's mistakes and so draw the best out of that and do the best that is applicable to our own countries. I think that would be my takeaway from today's session. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Nanamhla.
Okay, just as a concluding remark, and not to summarize everything, the stuff that I've said, but I think one thing that the South African officials or municipal officials or any others in other developing countries that they need to focus on is to engage with the people. So if we are going to be planting trees in low-cost housing areas, let us go there with the intention of finding out what the people want. And not just to say we're going there to plant trees for them. We need to also help the people recognize their own agency, that they too can be part of this, that this is for them, with them, by them. And if we take that route, I can assure you that within the next 5-10 years, we're going to be seeing a lot of difference in the development of the urban forest in all sectors of the urban area, be it poor, middle class, or wealthy. We can all get there, and we all just need to do it together.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Okay, well, look, let's reopen the poll again then, and we can just see if any of you have changed your mind out there. So, Sophie, there we go. So if you just want to vote again on the poll with what you think, you've got your 3 options there. I don't think it matters too much, to be honest. I've just learned too much to even think about results, but what have we got? So to begin with, a lack of knowledge and awareness of arboriculture was out in front when we started our session. Where are we? All these people just can't decide. You've bamboozled them. Well, look at that. Lack of knowledge and awareness is got a healthy lead there. Okay, let's stop it there. I think that's fine. We always seem to nobody's mind ever gets changed. We always end in the same orders. We'll have to work out a new game. But anyway, brilliant. Look, thank you so much. First of all, to our panelists, that was amazing and just so interesting and so inspirational. We've got so many people on the comments and on the questions, I think, who just are very surprised and reassured to find out that we've all got the same issues everywhere. And so much of what you said resonated with people all over the world. And we have got people from all over the place. We've got so many people out there watching, all enjoying that. So thank you all panelists, you're brilliant. Thank you to everybody who's watched and taken the time to spend with us tonight. I hope you enjoyed it. I've just found that fantastic. I need to go and do some thinking, as I always have to after these. So anyone who wants to, there's always people who ask me when this is going to be online or where they can get more information. If you'd like to email me, john@trees.org.uk, then I will happily send you whatever information you want and put you in contact with people where you need it. So other than that, it just remains for me to say thank you all once again. Good night, take care, and hopefully see you soon. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.